So moving to your question 6 about the relative importance of domestic constitutionalization versus international constitutionalization. Remember that the functionalist approach, which I adhere to, which is a constitutional economics approach, is completely accepting of constitutional pluralism and completely agnostic as to where constitutionalization should take place. And so the answer to your question is really we should have the appropriate mechanisms of constitutionalization at both the domestic level and at the international level. It's not a competitive question, but a question of subsidiarity, a question of getting the levels of constitutionalization right. Having said that, it may be that where you have sufficient responses to constitutional concerns at either the international level or at the domestic level, that can take the place of those same kinds of responses at the other level. So if we have sufficient accountability and democratic responsiveness at the domestic level, and that carries through to the way that international law is made, it may be that we don't have much of a democratic deficit and we don't have to concern ourselves with democratic input at the international level. Now, in my work with Jeff Dunoff, we do talk about this idea of supplemental constitutionalization, this idea that under globalization, it may be that domestic constitutional restrictions, especially, and maybe even domestic constitutional abilities, are challenged, and given that challenge and certain needs, it may be appropriate to replace, to have substituted mechanisms at the international level, given the fact that globalization challenges constitutional mechanisms at the domestic level. Moving to question 7. You've asked what are the main threats and opportunities for global constitutionalism. I think the main threat is a kind of irrational and, in my mind, ignorant rejection of the possibility of constitutional structures, a kind of national patriotism or national constitutional deification, which we in the United States, I think, suffer from to some extent, that says our domestic constitution is exclusive. It's really a rejection of constitutional pluralism and the idea that these mechanisms could be useful at the international level. So that's the main threat. It's really an intellectual threat. The main opportunity is really to break free of those threats and to establish appropriate mechanisms that can allow states to make appropriate international law in a more effective way and respond to some of our great challenges, including global warming, financial catastrophe, disease, development. So we have a lot of global challenges. And I think it may well be that once we open our thinking to more constitutional structures at the international level, we will see that it may be useful to establish those structures in order to respond to real on-the-ground problems. This is the functional promise. And if we focus on a kind of domestic constitutional exclusivity, we can miss those opportunities. So that's really the threat, that we miss opportunities to have a better life through. I think that the discipline of global governance includes discussion of global constitutionalization. One of the things that I think has occurred in discussion of global governance is to focus more on informal mechanisms, on quote, governance, as opposed to focusing on formal mechanisms, on government. And I do believe that constitutionalization is the establishment of government, and that while there's a domain for useful soft law, there's also a domain for useful hard law. And so we have to just be careful to recognize when we're in a circumstance where there's an important domain for hard law, and to create hard law, including constitutional mechanisms as necessary. Turning to your question 9 about the relationship between global constitutionalization and global administrative law, I think that they're sister disciplines or sister focuses, and that global administrative law is focused on the accountability of international administrative law processes, which is a very important and interesting question. And you might say that global constitutionalization or global constitutional concerns focus a bit more broadly on other aspects of global constitutionalization, including legislative capacity, adjudication, supremacy, things of that nature, and that perhaps global administrative law is more involved in the particular question of how administrative practices take place. But certainly, as in domestic constitutional and administrative law, they're highly related areas that focus on due process and accountability, and on the structure of government.